I picked out this because it really kind of hits home on a couple points. And keep in mind, who's Eric Valentine? He's the guy who did Third Eye Blind. He mixed it and produced it. He did one of the best records of all time in that record. And he also worked with Queens of the Stone Age, another one of my favorite bands. He's worked with Slash. He's worked with Smash Mouth, who at the time when Smash Mouth was killing it, that first album with Walking on the Sun and all those amazing songs, that was him. This guy, recorded it, produced it. This is the guy. I'm pretty sure he mixed it also. Just to give you some context, he's talking about the first time he'd ever worked with Joe Satriani on an album. And this was Eric Valentine basically won Joe over by creating some really cool stuff, building tracks around songs that Joe had written. Really interesting, drum stuff, because Eric Valentine's a drummer, and he also played bass on a lot of this stuff. And this was right after the Extremist album, which was, an album that got huge for Joe Satriani. And he did that album, Joe, with Glyn Johns. So Glyn Johns, we all know as one of the most amazing producers of all time, the first of the lineage, as JJP has often said. He is Yoda, right? That's Glyn Johns, the guy who recorded and produced Led Zeppelin. So let's listen to what he's saying, because this is critical stuff. The clip I'm about to show is fair use for teaching purposes.
Process, we started working together, and so he would give me demos of songs, and then I would start working up treatments for them and play drums and bass on them, and I had an assistant, and we were doing it mostly remotely at the time. He was doing other things and, going in and out and playing tours, and this is coming off of that huge record that he made, the Extremist record that he had made with Johns. That was an incredible record, and so he was super busy, and I was just working away, and we got pretty far. We got pretty far down the process, and then there was a certain point along the way where I could just tell, like, he just was like realizing, I don't know about this. Like, this is just, I don't know if this is really how you're supposed to make a record, like if we'll ever finish,
Right.
And he just sort of lost confidence in the process at a certain point and lost his trust in my ability to carry it over the goal line, like in all the circumstances we were, I was bringing in other musicians to play and stuff. I was the youngest guy in the room,
right,
in every circumstance. And so I think I just didn't have the experience, to really be able to like drive the ship, There was a certain point where it was like, this is just, it doesn't matter how hard I work now. I haven't done enough, in the last 10 years to really prepare me to really be in charge of this project.
Right.
And so the project, we pulled the plug on it, and he ended up making that record with Glyn Johns. And this was sort of the best part of the whole experience. I really enjoyed working with Joe. I was sort of sad at the time that it didn't work out and stuff, and it was a bummer, and those things happen. But ultimately, once they started working with Glyn Johns, there's like, hey, do you want to come down and hang out while we're recording? I was like,
yeah, I suppose.
Hell fucking yeah. How soon can I come, And so I got to come, and they were recording at this beautiful place in Marin, California called The Site. And I got to go and hang out for a few days while they were tracking with Glyn Johns, and it was just an incredible experience.
There's something huge to be learned here. When you have a thing that works, like a sauce, and Rick Beato mentioned this recently in a Josh Freese interview, which is a super great interview also. That basically producers, and labels, back when it was the major label only kind of deal, they would use the same drummers, the same producers, the same people, because it was a superstition thing almost. They would be like, well, we might as well call this guy in because then we know we covered all our bases. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt we hit, it can't be the drums because we got Josh Freese to do it. You know what I'm saying? We can't possibly go wrong because we're using Glyn Johns. But there's a little bit of a flaw in this kind of a philosophy. And this is something that I want everyone to understand, especially people who are new, because there's a there's a silver lining to this for anybody who's relatively new, who doesn't have that kind of experience, but you also have to realize what else he's saying. So we're going to get to that part in a sec. The other thing I find huge that he's saying here is that he was willing to look within himself and basically realize, for whatever reason, he wasn't able to manage this session, and it got away from him. It got, like, the control aspect of what was happening got away from him. Joe, loved the work with Glyn Johns. He loved it, but he also liked a lot of the things Eric was doing, and he wanted to impart those into what Glyn Johns was doing. But Glyn Johns was not on board with that. It was just, that's a vanilla chocolate kind of thing, in that Eric Valentine was doing very unorthodox, out of the box things, and some of that stuff was just alien to Glyn Johns, where he's like, I don't do that, I don't know what that is, and I ain't doing it. And that kind of thing, works if you're a Glyn Johns. You can get away with that. But if you're somebody who's not at that level where you have a tried and true method, then, go the JJP way, go the Eric Valentine way of trying things, experimenting, putting a lot of thought and a lot of effort into each part of the process, a lot of care, because that's the next part I wanted to play for you that I thought was hugely important in this interview.
Great talent.
And did those days watching Glyn do things, did anything change for you? Or was it just like, he's the best, okay, now I'm back off doing my own thing? Or did you really take some stuff away from that?
I did. So very, very important takeaway from that, and not at all what you'd expect. It was really, really interesting. So I went out in the sound room, and as I went out in the room and saw the drum setup, I was like, whoa, there's the over under thing. Oh my God, he's doing the thing. Like, that's his thing, and he's doing it. That's so cool, And checked out all the setups and all the stuff, and and then it was time to do a take, and so the few people that were there that weren't playing in the room, the classic, like, on the couch at the back of the room, like, oh boy, let's see what happens, and so they started recording, and it was playing back, and I just remember sitting there just like, what's going on? Like, this doesn't sound that great. What's going on? And it was really bizarre. Like, I could just tell, and as Glyn was working through stuff, this is just sort of my perspective on it, that he, at this point in his career, had his techniques, and he knows if he shows up and he does them, that he will have done his job, and he was really not, like, fighting for it. He was just there to do things the way he does them, and if it works, great. If it's not perfect, that's great too. And that was really the thing. That was the takeaway for me, was like, it's the caring that matters more than the techniques. Like, all of his experience, all of his incredible experience, those decades of amazing records that he made, aren't as valuable as actually in that moment, like, I'm going to fight for this, right, and make it be what I want it to be. Like, that's what really mattered, and that's what struck me in that moment. That I'd rather have the young guy that's still fighting for it than the guy that's just going through the motions and doing the thing that worked back in 1960 when he recorded whatever.
And so when the band came in for playbacks, were they just in thrall and it was all okay? Or what was your take on that? I mean, not that I'm just prying now because it's interesting.
Yeah. And, I'm always conflicted about stories like this, because, I have an extraordinary reverence for Glyn Johns.
Absolutely. And look, and he's made some unbelievable records recently. It's not like, we phoned it in. Yeah.
And who knows really what the overriding circumstances were for this particular record. And there may be lots of people that feel like it's the best sounding record Joe ever made. This is very subjective at a certain point. This is just based on the things that I've loved about Glyn Johns recordings, and what I love about recordings in general was not coming out of those speakers. Like, it was very identifiable for me,
What he just said is so huge. In other words, everyone out there who's not a 20-year pro, who's not of somebody who's worked with huge bands, who hasn't mixed Grammy-winning songs, you guys have to realize that the caring aspect, especially in production, in the aspect where you can impart the most creativity, especially there, the person who cares the most will get it to where it needs to be without sacrificing anything, without looking at it like, well, this is my technique and it must sound good and there we go. It's always a fight and a battle every step of the way in order to make something amazing. And if you're going to make it amazing, you need to look at it that way, where it's your entire life and your purpose to make this amazing. And how do I do it? And is it there yet? And be honest with yourself. When you are producing, it's like a Glyn Johns is Yoda. He, like I just said, he is Yoda. But that doesn't mean that Yoda is the right guy for the job on any given job. It doesn't mean that. Sure, could he do a great job on a lot of people? Yes. But Eric Valentine actually says this in this interview a little bit later on. He says, great is often the enemy of groundbreaking. It's not the same. It's short of amazing. Yes, a certain level of experience helps you manage sessions better. A certain level of experience may help you maintain the trust better. A certain level of experience may help other people kind of disregard or just let you get away with things that otherwise, if you were a newbie, you wouldn't be able to get away with. So it allows you to stay in the room longer. It allows you to stay in the game longer, right? But don't ever underestimate that hunger, that need to win, the drive to make things amazing. Don't ever underestimate the drive to experiment, the drive to try things that aren't in your arsenal of techniques, the drive to say, I'm going to run this into this, into this. Why can't I? Why wouldn't I be able to do that? Why shouldn't we try it? That's the beautiful thing about people who grew up not in the old school way of this is how you do things. Because sometimes the this is how you do things actually does prevent you from reaching that higher level that you would be able to grasp at and finally get to because of the creativity it takes to get there. Because of the fact that it's out of the box in terms of not the typical way to do things. You got to look at it this way. And Eric Valentine clearly realized it at the time. There's another story he tells with the Third Eye Blind record where he's literally talking about how Third Eye Blind loved his production. They thought it was amazing. Then they decided they're going to mix some songs with this very big name guy, and he doesn't mention the name. And then they're going to mix some with Eric. And basically, it was this deciding factor of which songs to go where. And over time, more and more songs went to the column of that guy. But this was before that guy did anything, the other guy. They wound up starting the mixes with that other guy, and they brought in Eric because they weren't really happy with what they were hearing. They didn't know why. Eric Valentine went over there, listened to the stuff, pulled up his, analog reels that he had so he could listen, so the band could hear what was going on. And as soon as the band heard where it started before and where it was now in those mixes, they realized that this name guy they hired wasn't the guy to make that record sound the way they all knew it needed to sound. So what does this mean? This means that the name guy isn't always the answer. It means that the name guy could be not as good as what you could do, somebody who isn't a name guy, somebody who isn't Grammy winning, somebody who doesn't have the accolades. Always keep this in mind, that you have the chance too, if you care enough, if you're the one who's constantly improving and trying to improve and is not satisfied until it gets to where they know it could be in their head. When you want it more than everyone else, the person who wants it more doesn't stop at the finish line. They can keep going. They can run way further than the person who is running for the sake of getting to the finish line. And this applies on all levels, in all businesses, in all aspects of life, especially in audio, because not everybody starts at the top. Nobody does. And not everybody is like the person who can have all those accolades, because none of that's really relevant at the end of the day if you've put in the time. If you've put in the time, you will be noticed eventually. And I've mentioned this in another video where I talk about how paying for streams is ridiculous because, it's not it. Be relentless. Being relentless means you will break through at some point. It's got nothing to do with paying for streams. It's got nothing to do with the fact that you may or may not have accolades right now. Got nothing to do with it. What has to do with it is how hard are you working to get where you need to be? Because if you are working hard enough, you will get there eventually. All right? I want to leave you guys with that because we could go all day talking about how great this interview was, but it's an amazing interview, and you guys have this ability in you. All of you do, and people who are out there, you know, who are worried that they don't have the accolades, and that's why they won't ever get to where they need to be, and it seems impossible. I want to let you know it's not impossible. You can be like Eric was, where he was able to, you know, get in front of some people with his pure desire, his innate need to keep trying, keep thinking. Same with JJP. Their innate need to always be in the studio, always be trying stuff, always be working. When other people would go out and relax and want to take time off, these guys don't. That's why they get where they need to be. All right? It's that, you know, combined with, you know, that's giving opportunity a door to knock on is what luck is. Don't look at it like you got to get lucky. Lucky happens when you give opportunity that door, all right? If you don't do that, you will never be able to get where you need to be. So this is how I look at life. This is how I look at music. This is how I look at everything. So you guys, you got this ability. You do. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'm going to link to some other videos. If you like the video, do me a favor, hit the like button. It really helps. Drop a comment. That helps even more. And also hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Tons more like this. Other videos coming. You guys, you got this, all right? Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.